Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. In this episode, we're going to go back into the archives to find an answer to a question from an inspirational teacher. And for those of you who are hearing it for the first time, hopefully this points you towards an episode that you may want to listen to now. As you're listening, I think it would be fantastic to think about how you might respond to this question. And why not share it in the comments wherever you're listening, whether that be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope it provides useful food for thought for your professional development this year. Without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So we met and bonded over a shared love of education research.
We did.
And then the rest is history. What was the paper that changed the world? You know, I like to call it the Thunderbolt because nothing's the same after you've got the Thunderbolt. And what is the number one paper that you think all primary teachers should read?
Right. So I would say my Thunderbolt paper came on the back, actually, of a book. It would have been about 4 or 5 years ago now, when I first landed in Kent. I went to the Kent Maths Conference and saw Craig Barton speak. And I was, again, it was a day out. I was the maths lead. I didn't really know a huge amount at that point. I thought I did, but and he was last on. He was the keynote at the end of the day. I was like, I was even considering swanning off and going to Burger King. But to be honest, probably the best decision I've ever made in my entire life was to not swan off and get a Burger King, because Burger King's always there in the morning, And I watched Craig speak, and I was just dumbfounded. I was absolutely dumbfounded, and I joined Twitter that night and swiftly had an existential crisis about, like he said, how little I know about anything, and how I'd neglected the body of professional research and reading that has sat there for so many years, through a willful ignorance and an overconfidence that just I look back on with sheer embarrassment. And so I got his book straight away. And one of the papers, I'd say the stand-up, because obviously he's brilliantly referenced that book. And one of the first papers that he references, talks about in that book, is Kirshner's Why Minimal Guidance During Instruction Does Not Work, which I know it's if you ask teachers about what papers are seminal, and I would imagine I wouldn't be the only ones quoting that as a thunderbolt, because it just blew the landscape open in terms of thinking towards instruction and how we can really kind of put to bed a lot of discovery learning and stuff that I'd done in teaching. I looked back on and thought, I've wasted hours and hours of my time doing things that had no purpose whatsoever. And that for me was a massive thunderbolt striking my teaching heart. So and starting it again, probably, I would say, in a good way, massively important paper, that. Yeah.
The one thing that stands out to me about that paper is how well written it is. There's not a word wasted in taking their position forward.
Absolutely.
And so in the past, when I've been looking at examples of well-written introductions and things, I'll always go back to that because of how striking it is that,
it is.
They've got a message, they've got the sort of, they've done the legwork, and then they are absolutely clinical in their execution of that paper. So I can totally see where you're coming from.
And hearing them speak on Carl and Paul and Craig on Craig's podcast the other day was just, it kind of solidified that, like when Paul was explaining all about the process of writing the paper and how he'd gone back and forth, and the sort of the rigor in the process that he'd gone through in writing it. But he'd never ever expected it to get, to have the reception that it did in the education and research community, but just you're absolutely right. It's just it's a thunderbolt. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. 100%. And then one paper that all primary teachers need to read, as well as Kirshner et al.
Right. I'm gonna give one it's a recent read for me, and it's one that has massively sort of made me sit up, and I think it's really important. And it's Mary Kennedy's Parsing the Practice of Teaching, and it's not a particularly long paper, but it is wonderfully astute. And what it did for me was kind of, she explains quite clearly. You talked earlier about how everything comes together. Well, she kind of breaks it down into 5 key sections. So, like 5 things that work that novice teachers need to crack. And I'm obviously thinking about this as an important thing. I think this is an important paper, A, for a novice person reading it, if you're engaging with research, because it lays it out. B, for someone who's more experienced, because they can look back and think, if they're in part of the school improvement process, it's important. So she talks about an alternative approach to passing practice. And basically, she nails it. She takes it down to 5 things: portraying the curriculum, enlisting student participation, exposing student thinking, and containing student behaviour. Now, so when you look at those principles, right, and what she says, and she goes into more detail about how, well, it's interesting because she doesn't tell you what to do, but she kind of just makes you deeply consider purpose. And I think that's what I was saying to you about purpose, about like, and she says how these 5 elements, how they enact and their relationship between each other is key. So like, if there's something, there's give and take, if you've got behavior, let's say you've got a more higher end stimulus in your lesson, there's something going on, then the likelihood is the behavior is gonna be needed to be adjusted slightly because to account for this. Do you see what I mean? Like, and it goes, and then curriculum planning it has an impact on this, and it's kind of, and then to provide that, you need to have thought about your planning structures and how that. So it's like the purpose and why, and what essentially what she says is, early career teachers and novice teachers will look at good practices and say and look at the cold calling and go, yeah, fantastic, yeah, great. I've seen it. I've seen that good practice happening. And I've been told why it's good, but then when they're in front of a class, cold calling, when's the right time to cold call? What do I do with the cold call? What is the deeper purpose to this stuff? Okay. That for me is what it struck me as is this, like, it's the core of teaching. It's like it's the nuts and bolts of teaching that almost goes. It got me to think a step deeper than walkthroughs again. Mm-hmm. Like it got me to think, okay, walkthrough sits here and here's the why, here's underneath how this stuff kind of plays off each other. It's messy and it's complicated, but it's what teaching is. And for me, that just and Peps McRae in his new book about motivation, funnily enough, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, but he opens that book with education is compulsory but learning is not, and it's a quote from this paper that I hadn't realised it's from this paper. So it's obviously been an important paper for him. I hadn't realised. I'd come across it because Josh Goodrich, who develops Powerful Action Steps, who is another fantastic resource, but I won't go into that now. He recommended the paper to me. tremendous paper, and I would suggest all teachers read it. Passing the practice of teaching.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I suppose I think there are a few people that I'm aware of that think as deeply about teacher development than perhaps McRae. So if he's been inspired by this paper, then it sounds like an absolute must read. And just the way you described the relationship between those different parts, you can almost see why it takes 10 years to get anywhere near decent at this job.
Exactly.
And I think the more teachers in their first year or in their in their initial training, the more that they realize that it's a journey and that you're going to be supported on that journey, then the profession will be a whole lot better off for it. So that sounds excellent. So I don't think I've read that myself, but the first thing I do when we finish this call is go and read that paper.
So, yeah, honestly, it is something. It's quite something.
Nice.